Baron Trump steps into a lavish restaurant in the heart of the city, dressed in simple, slightly wrinkled clothes, as if he had just finished an ordinary day. Choosing a quiet, discreet table, he makes an effort to go unnoticed while the radiant glow of crystal chandeliers bathes the space in golden light. However, before he even has the chance to place an order, a waitress approaches, her expression filled with disdain, her posture stiff with arrogance. "Are you sure you can afford to be here?" She sneers, her voice laced with irony and amusement, loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. Laughter ripples through the room, but what happens next leaves everyone speechless and unveils a truth that changes everything. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We have another special story just for you. The Lumere restaurant was a world of its own, a place where time moved at a luxurious pace, where fortunes were discussed over candlelight, and where the air carried the scent of aged wine and exclusivity. Located in the heart of Beverly Hills, it was the kind of establishment where appearances mattered. Every detail, from the imported marble floors to the golden chandeliers that bathed the dining room in a soft glow, had been carefully designed to impress. Tonight, the restaurant was alive with muted conversations and hushed laughter, as soft notes from a piano played a delicate tune in the background, his music weaving effortlessly into the symphony of clinking glasses and the occasional pop of a champagne cork. Wealth moved easily here, worn like an invisible crown by the patrons seated at their tables, dressed in designer suits and flowing silk gowns. Then the door swung open. At first, few people noticed the man who entered. He walked in without hesitation, his posture relaxed, his movements unhurried. His clothes were simple: jeans, a slightly wrinkled shirt, and a worn jacket that spoke more of comfort than wealth. His boots had seen years of use, and yet he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who did not need validation from the world around him. Baron Trump had stepped into Lumere, but to everyone watching, he was just a man out of place. Behind the reception desk, Ashley, one of the restaurant's most polished waitresses, was in the middle of confirming a VIP reservation when she caught sight of him. Her eyes flickered over his attire, scanning, categorizing. Years of experience had given her the ability to instantly judge the worth of a customer, not just in money but in presence, and this man didn't fit. Her manicured fingers paused on the keyboard, her lips pursing ever so slightly before she forced her most professional smile into place. She smoothed out her uniform as she approached him. The click of her heels against the marble floor was precise, poised, and deliberate. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice pleasant but distant. "Can I help you?" "I'd like a table," Baron Trump responded, his tone polite and measured. Ashley hesitated. He wasn't rude, he wasn't demanding, but he was misplaced. "This is a very exclusive restaurant," she said slowly, enunciating each word as if ensuring he understood. Baron Trump simply nodded, unaffected. "Yes, this is where I'd like to eat." Ashley's smile thinned just a moment. She turned sharply and headed toward the reservation desk, her eyes narrowing as she typed into the system, searching for a name that she already knew wouldn't be there. When nothing appeared, she exhaled through her nose, already shaping the words she would use to send him away. What she didn't know was that by the end of the night, the rules of Lumere would be rewritten, and so would she. Ashley's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second longer than necessary, as if giving the system time to miraculously produce a reservation that she already knew didn't exist. The screen remained blank. She resisted the urge to roll her eyes and turned back toward the dining area. Baron Trump was still there, seated at the least desirable table in the restaurant, tucked away near the kitchen, where the clatter of dishes and muffled orders from the chefs created an entirely different atmosphere from the refined hum of conversation at the front of the dining room. Ashley had led him there with brisk, confident steps, dropping the menu in front of him with casual indifference. "This table should do," she had said, her voice coated in artificial politeness. "It's more private." Baron Trump had only smiled, a simple nod of gratitude that somehow irritated her more than any protest ever could. Now, from across the room, she watched him as she leaned against the bar, pretending to busy herself with arranging a set of cocktail napkins. He was completely at ease, scanning the menu without urgency, seemingly unbothered by his surroundings. Ashley huffed under her breath. He won't last. His money is on 5 minutes, maybe 10, just long enough for him to see the prices, realize his mistake, and awkwardly excuse himself. They always do. Yet minute after minute passed. She stole another glance. He hadn't so much as looked up. Instead, he sat calmly, his fingers resting lightly on the edges of the leather-bound menu, his eyes following the descriptions with genuine curiosity. It was as if the unspoken tension, the barely concealed judgment of both staff and patrons, didn't touch him at all. Ashley clicked her tongue, grabbing her notepad. "Fine, if he wants to play along, he'll speed up the inevitable," she muttered, putting on a practiced mechanical smile. She made her way back to his table. "Have you decided what you'd like?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Her tone was neutral, but just sharp enough to imply he might need help navigating such an expensive selection. Baron Trump looked up, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Yes," he said simply. Then, with the same easy demeanor, he pointed to one of the most expensive dishes on the menu. "Filet de Rossini?" Ashley blinked, her voice betraying a flicker of disbelief. She knew the dish well, a $350 cut of prime filet mignon topped with foie gras and drizzled in truffle sauce. It was meant for connoisseurs. Baron Trump nodded, unfazed. "Yes, it sounds wonderful." Ashley let out a short, incredulous laugh, covering her mouth with her fingers. "Oh, of course," she said, her tone shifting to something closer to mockery. "Just to confirm, sir, you do know that this dish is $350? His expression didn't change. "I do." Ashley stared for a second longer than she meant to. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't second-guessing himself. She had expected hesitation, maybe an awkward backtrack or a muttered request for something cheaper, but there was nothing, just calm certainty. Annoyed, she snapped her notepad closed. "Very well," she said, scribbling the order down with a flourish. Then, with a knowing smirk, she added, "Just so there are no surprises later, I suggest you double-check the prices. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." Baron Trump's slight smile didn't waver. "I'm certain." Ashley hesitated. This wasn't how the game was supposed to go. With an exaggerated sigh, she straightened, flipping the notepad closed. "Well, they'll let the chef know. Just a heads up, we expect a minimum 20% tip here." She threw that last part in with a sweet, venomous smile, then turned on her heel and walked off before he could respond. From behind the bar, another waiter, Michael, one of the more reserved staff members, watched the exchange with thinly veiled discomfort. He has seen Ashley do this before, though never with quite this much effort. "Maybe you should ease up," he muttered as she reached the service counter. Ashley scoffed. "Oh, come on, you saw him. He doesn't belong here. He probably thinks a steak is supposed to come with fries." Michael frowned but said nothing. Meanwhile, Baron Trump sat at his table still, completely unfazed. He folded the menu shut, placing it neatly beside him, and leaned back slightly in his chair. From across the restaurant, the elderly gentleman who had been observing the interaction from his table lifted his wine glass in a quiet, knowing toast. Baron Trump saw it and nodded in return. Dinner was only just beginning, but for Ashley, the real lesson had yet to come. Ashley moved through the restaurant with practiced elegance, her tray balanced effortlessly in one hand as she stopped at a table occupied by an elegantly dressed couple. She flashed a perfect, rehearsed smile as she leaned in ever so slightly and placed a cocktail in front of the woman. "There you are, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway," she said. "Enjoy." The couple murmured their thanks, barely acknowledging her. But Ashley didn't mind. She was used to being invisible in the presence of wealth, except when she was delivering perfection. That was the part of her job she took pride in, which is why tonight was particularly irritating. Across the dining room, Baron Trump still sat there, calm and composed, at his table in the farthest corner. He had placed his order without hesitation, hadn't flinched at the price, and now sat watching the pianist play as if he belonged there. Ashley's smug certainty that he would leave had begun to crumble. Still, she wasn't about to lose the game. She took her time before putting in his order, intentionally delaying as she attended to the restaurant's more deserving guests. She chatted with a high-profile couple, laughed at a joke from a regular patron, and even delivered a cocktail to a table that wasn't hers, all before, begrudgingly, making her way to the kitchen. Let him wait, she thought. It wasn't long before she noticed the elderly gentleman from across the room watching her. He had been paying attention to the exchange with Baron Trump earlier, and now he sat silent but observant, his sharp blue eyes flicking between her and the man she had chosen to ignore. Ashley's irritation deepened, as if to prove she was not neglecting her job. Finally, she made her way back to Baron Trump's table, pulled out her notepad with a theatrical flick, tapping her pen against the page. "Can I get you anything else?" "A drink, maybe?" she asked in a flat tone. Baron Trump, who had been quietly watching the pianist, turned his attention back to her. "A glass of red wine, please," he said politely. "Whatever you'd recommend," he added. Ashley raised an eyebrow. "Red wine, in that jacket?" She let out a short laugh. You sure some of our selections go for over $1,000 a bottle? Baron Trump's expression didn't change. I'm sure you'll pick something good, he replied. Ashley pursed her lips. He wasn't giving any sign of embarrassment or hesitation. Just calm, collected certainty. Fine, of course, she said, scribbling on her pad. He'll bring something appropriate. As she walked away, she leaned toward Michael, who was polishing glasses behind the bar. He's just pretending to be polite, she muttered, loud enough for Michael to hear. But it's obvious he's uncomfortable. I give it 20 minutes before he asks for the check. Michael didn't respond. He just kept wiping the same glass, his expression unreadable. Ashley, however, was convinced Baron Trump didn't belong here, and she was going to prove it. The air inside Lumere carried its usual weight of quiet exclusivity, soft jazz, clinking glasses, and the occasional hushed laughter from a table of well-dressed socialites. Everything, as always, was perfectly curated, except for one detail. Baron Trump still sat patiently at his table, undisturbed by the disdain that had been aimed at him all evening. Ashley, however, was growing more frustrated by the minute. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't glancing nervously at the menu as she had predicted, making an excuse to leave. Instead, he sat completely at ease, sipping the wine she had reluctantly brought him. From across the restaurant, the elderly gentleman in the navy blue suit had been watching the scene unfold. His name was Henry Sinclair, a longtime patron of Lumere. Unlike most guests, he didn't come for the spectacle of wealth. He came for good food and quiet observation, and what he had been observing tonight did not sit well with him. After a brief internal debate, Henry decided he had seen enough. Setting down his wine glass, he stood and walked toward Baron Trump's table. Ashley, who had been passing by, stopped abruptly when she saw the older man approach her, her eyes narrowing slightly, suspicion flickering in them. Baron Trump looked up as Henry arrived, offering a calm, polite nod. "Good evening, young man," Henry said, his voice rich with experience and a touch of amusement. "I hope you don't mind me interrupting." Baron Trump set his glass down, offering a small smile. "Not at all." Henry nodded approvingly before leaning in ever so slightly, his voice lowering though there was no mistaking the firm kindness in it. "I've been watching how you've been treated tonight," he said, glancing briefly toward Ashley, who stiffened. "And I must say, your patience is admirable." Baron Trump's eyes flickered with understanding, but he remained unbothered. "Thank you," he said simply. Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I don't think I could have handled it quite as well, but I will say this. Sometimes patience is a test of character, and you seem to be passing it with flying colors." Before Baron Trump could reply, Ashley stepped forward, her usual air of confidence slightly fractured. "Sir," she said, her voice still polished but now laced with controlled annoyance. "Is there something I can assist you with? I wouldn't want you to disturb our guest." Henry turned his head, fixing her with a look that, despite its calmness, carried weight. "I was merely offering my respect," he said smoothly. After a brief pause, he added, "Something you seem to have forgotten tonight." A beat of silence passed. Ashley's fingers clenched around her notepad, but she forced a tight-lipped smile. "I assure you, sir, we treat all our guests with professionalism." Henry's expression didn't change. "No, my dear, you do not." At that, Ashley's posture went rigid. Baron Trump, meanwhile, remained silent, watching the interaction with an expression that gave away nothing. The conversation had not gone the way Ashley expected, and for the first time that evening, she wasn't sure she was in control anymore. Ashley stormed away from Baron Trump's table, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. The encounter with Mr. Sinclair had rattled her more than she cared to admit. She wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone as well-respected as the older gentleman. But it didn't matter. Baron Trump still didn't belong here. She straightened her posture, smoothing down the front of her uniform as she approached the bar, where Michael was methodically polishing glasses. He barely glanced at her before reaching for another glass. But Ashley didn't care. She needed to vent. "He's just pretending to be polite," she muttered, loud enough for Michael to hear. "But it's obvious he's uncomfortable." She reached for an empty water glass and placed it down harder than necessary. "I bet he doesn't even know what he's eating." Michael sighed but said nothing. Ashley continued her frustration, bubbling over. "It's always the same with these types. They come here thinking they can play dress up for a night, act like they belong, but the moment the bill comes, they let out a short, knowing laugh. They panic, they make excuses, they disappear. Michael finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Maybe he just wants to have dinner, he suggested softly. Ashley scoffed. Oh, please, she gestured toward Baron Trump's table. Look at him. He's not like our usual clientele. He's trying to prove something. Michael exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. Or maybe he just doesn't care about what you think. Ashley's jaw tightened before she could retort. She noticed a couple at a nearby table watching her. They had been whispering among themselves and casting disapproving glances in her direction. The woman, elegantly dressed in a navy blue gown, shook her head. This is disgraceful, she murmured to her companion. He's been nothing but polite, and she's been trying to humiliate him all night. Her husband nodded, his frown deepening. I think we should say something to the manager. Ashley felt a hot flush of irritation rise to her cheeks. This was not how tonight was supposed to go. Meanwhile, at his table, Baron Trump had noticed the shift in atmosphere. He wasn't oblivious to the sideways glances, the hushed conversations. He could feel the growing unease in the room, and yet he remained unbothered, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Mr. Sinclair raised his wine glass from across the room in a subtle toast. Baron Trump caught the gesture and responded with a slight nod, the faintest hint of a smile playing at his lips. Dinner was far from over, and Ashley, whether she realized it or not, was quickly losing control of the game. The tension in Lumere had shifted. Conversations that were once effortless and detached now carried an undercurrent of curiosity. More and more patrons had noticed the quiet man in the corner, the way he carried himself with effortless composure, the way he seemed unfazed by the judgment aimed at him, and, more importantly, the way Ashley had been treating him. Ashley, however, was too preoccupied to notice the subtle shift in the room. She had convinced herself that Baron Trump would soon realize his mistake and quietly leave before the check arrived. She had seen it happen before. People who walked into Lumere, thinking they belonged, would only retreat in quiet humiliation when reality set in. So when the restaurant manager appeared at the entrance, scanning the room with sharp, practiced eyes, Ashley was certain she had control of the situation. But when the manager arrived, she felt relieved, confident that he would support her. She quickly stepped toward him, lowering her voice. I was just handling a guest who doesn't belong here. He doesn't have a reservation, and frankly, I don't think he can. But before she could finish, the manager froze. His eyes widened as he recognized the man sitting quietly in the back of the restaurant. A flicker of tension crossed his face before he immediately brushed past Ashley and headed straight toward Baron Trump. Ashley blinked in confusion. She had never seen the manager move with such urgency. Then the impossible happened. Baron Trump, the manager exclaimed, his voice filled with genuine respect. We weren't expecting you tonight. It's truly an honor. A heavy silence fell over the room. Every guest, every waiter, even the pianist stopped their activity, their attention shifting to the unassuming man in the corner. Baron Trump, calm as ever, simply lifted his wine glass, offering a small, knowing smile. Ashley felt the blood drain from her face. The manager turned back to her, his expression now serious. Ashley, do you even know who this man is? Her throat went dry. The manager took a slow breath before delivering the final blow. Baron Trump is not just a VIP guest. He is one of the owners of Lumere. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze in time. Ashley's legs felt unsteady. Every sarcastic remark, every dismissive glance, every moment of disrespect came crashing back like a tidal wave of regret. Baron Trump set his glass down and slowly rose from his seat, his gaze now locked onto Ashley. Now, let's talk about how we treat people, he said, his voice calm yet commanding. The weight of those words crushed the room. Ashley couldn't breathe. Everything she had assumed, everything she had so confidently believed about the man she had tried to humiliate, had just shattered in an instant. In that moment, she realized she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. A tense, deafening silence hung over the restaurant. Every patron, every waiter, and even the pianist, who had been playing softly in the corner, froze in place, their attention fixed on Baron Trump and the restaurant's manager standing beside his table. Ashley, still rooted to the spot, felt her knees go weak, her hands tremble slightly, but she quickly clasped them behind her back as though holding on to the last shred of control. Baron Trump, the manager said again, his voice quieter now, his tone laced with apology. I deeply regret that we didn't recognize you right away. Please let me know how I can make your experience more enjoyable. Baron Trump smiled politely, but there was an unmistakable firmness in his eyes. He gestured for the manager to sit, and with a nod, the man complied, easing into the chair across from him. "I'm fine," Baron Trump said calmly, "but there's something we need to address." The manager stiffened his gaze, flickering toward Ashley, who was still standing by the bar, pale and motionless. "This can't be happening," Ashley thought as Baron Trump folded his hands on the table, his posture relaxed yet commanding. "You see, I didn't come here tonight to make a scene. I came to have a quiet dinner like any other guest. But what happened tonight wasn't about me. It was about how we treat people when we think they have nothing to offer us." The quiet authority in his voice rippled through the room. The manager nodded slowly in understanding. "You're absolutely right, Baron Trump," he said, his voice carefully measured. "I can assure you that this behavior does not reflect the values we uphold at Lumere." Baron Trump glanced at Ashley, his expression unreadable. "Unfortunately, that wasn't my experience tonight." Ashley felt the weight of every eye in the room on her. She swallowed hard, wishing she could disappear. The manager turned to her, his face taut with restrained anger. "Ashley," he said quietly, "would you care to explain yourself?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind felt blank, every carefully curated layer of confidence crumbling under the crushing weight of her mistake. "I didn't know who he was," she finally stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought." She trailed off, realizing that any excuse she could offer would only make things worse. "That's exactly the point," Baron Trump said gently but firmly. "It shouldn't matter who I am. Every person who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, whether they're wearing a designer suit or jeans and an old jacket." Ashley blinked rapidly, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. She had spent years perfecting her image, climbing the ranks of Lumere, convinced that status was everything. And now, in front of the entire dining room, she had been exposed for what she really was, someone who judged too quickly and too harshly. Baron Trump's voice softened, but his message remained clear. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after those mistakes, how we choose to learn from them." Ashley nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was tight with emotion. The manager cleared his throat, his expression still stern but now tinged with regret. "Baron Trump, I assure you, we will be reviewing our training protocols immediately. This kind of behavior will not be tolerated at Lumere." Baron Trump gave a small nod. "Good. But remember, real change doesn't come from rules. It comes from culture, from how we treat each other day in and day out." The entire room remained silent, absorbing his words. Some patrons nodded subtly, clearly moved by the quiet wisdom in Baron Trump's message. The elderly gentleman, Mr. Sinclair, raised his wine glass again in a silent toast, a small smile playing at his lips. Baron Trump stood slowly, smoothing his jacket as he did. "Thank you," he said, addressing the room. "I hope tonight was a reminder that kindness and respect aren't just for the people we think deserve it, they're for everyone." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind a restaurant forever changed. Ashley watched him go, tears silently slipping down her cheeks. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. She would never forget the lesson she learned tonight. The once bustling dining room of Lumere had settled into a hushed murmur. Even as Baron Trump left the restaurant, his words still lingered in the air, hanging over the staff and patrons like an unspoken challenge. At the back of the room, Ashley sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, goring realization. She had misjudged not just a man, but an entire way of thinking. She had spent years believing that prestige and exclusivity meant exclusion, that maintaining the restaurant's elite reputation meant deciding who was worthy of good service. But tonight, in front of the very guest she had sought to impress, she had been exposed, her arrogance, her prejudice, her mistake, and, worst of all, it had never even crossed her mind to question it. Across the room, the restaurant manager remained seated at Baron Trump's now empty table, staring at his hands, his jaw tight with thought. The weight of what had happened was not lost on him either. Lumere had prided itself on being a place of refinement and excellence, but at what cost? Henry Sinclair, the elderly patron who had stepped in earlier, took one last sip of his wine before rising from his seat. He placed his napkin neatly beside his plate and walked toward Ashley. She looked up hesitantly as he stopped beside her, his expression unreadable. "You know," he said, his voice calm but firm, "real class isn't about how expensive your suit is or how much money you spend on dinner." Ashley swallowed hard, nodding uncertainly. It's about how you treat people. Henry continued, and I think tonight you learned that the hard way. Ashley let out a shaky breath. I did, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry studied her for a moment before giving a small, approving nod. Then make sure you don't forget it. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ashley alone with her thoughts. The restaurant staff stood quietly near the entrance, unsure of what to say or do. The night had shifted something fundamental, and everyone could feel it. Ashley wiped her hand across her face and took a deep breath. Tonight had changed her, and tomorrow she would decide who she wanted to be moving forward. The cool night air greeted Baron Trump as he stepped out of Lumere, the quiet hum of the city wrapping around him like an old, familiar tune. The neon glow of Beverly Hills painted the streets in shifting shades of gold and blue, casting long shadows that stretched across the sidewalk. He paused just outside the entrance, taking a slow breath. Tonight had not gone the way anyone had expected. Behind him, the restaurant remained still, its once lively energy dimmed by reflection. He knew that his presence, his words, and his silence had left an impact, but whether that impact would lead to real change was something only time could tell. Baron Trump didn't like the idea of humiliating people. That had never been his intention. But sometimes, people needed to be confronted with their own actions in order to see what had been invisible to them for so long. As he stood there, his thoughts lingering on the evening's events, the glass doors behind him swung open. A hesitant voice broke the silence. Baron Trump? He turned. It was Ashley. She stood just outside the doorway, her posture no longer carrying its usual sharp confidence. Instead, there was uncertainty in her eyes. Uncertainty and something else, humility. She hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Baron Trump studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. I appreciate that. Ashley swallowed hard. I thought I understood people. I thought I knew who deserved respect and who didn't, but tonight. She exhaled, shaking her head. I see now that I had it all wrong. Baron Trump's expression remained calm, but there was warmth in his gaze. What matters is what you do with that realization. Ashley nodded slowly. I won't forget this, she promised, and I won't be the same after tonight. For the first time since their encounter began, Baron Trump smiled. Not just politely, but genuinely. Then it was a good night after all, he said. Ashley watched as he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing down the illuminated streets. She knew, without a doubt, that she had just experienced something she would carry for the rest of her life. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to change. The message of this story is a powerful reminder that true worth is not measured by appearances, status, or wealth, but by how we treat others. Baron Trump's quiet confidence and unwavering kindness highlight the importance of humility, respect, and empathy in a world often quick to judge. Through Ashley's transformation, we see that change begins with self-awareness and the willingness to grow. The story challenges us to look beyond the surface, to treat everyone with dignity, and to remember that kindness is the greatest mark of true character, no matter where we are or who we meet. If this story resonated with you, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to discover more tales of hope, compassion, and resilience.